Alexander Reed sipped his champagne slowly, his eyes scanning the crowded ballroom of the Grand Harbor Hotel. Another charity gala, another night of the wealthy patting themselves on the back. He checked his watch, custom-made in Switzerland, and wondered how soon he could leave without seeming rude. 2 hours in and he was already bored. "Alex, there you are." He turned to see Patricia Hernandez, the event organizer, approaching with her characteristic wide smile. Alex had known Patricia for years. They had attended the same private university, though he barely remembered her from those days. Now she headed one of the city's largest arts foundations and seemed to have made it her personal mission to extract as much money from him as possible. "Patricia," he said, offering a practiced smile. "Wonderful event, isn't it? And we've already raised $800,000 for music education in public schools." She linked her arm through his and guided him toward the center of the room. "But we're hoping to break $1 million tonight, and you're just the man to help us get there." Alex raised an eyebrow. "I already donated $50,000 at the door." "Yes, and that was very generous." Patricia's smile didn't waver. "But the auction is about to begin, and there are some truly special items this year." Before he could protest, she had led him to a table near the front of the room where several of his business associates sat. Thomas Chen, his chief financial officer, shot him an amused look as he took his seat. "She got you too, huh?" Thomas muttered. "Apparently my $50,000 was just the entrance fee," Alex replied dryly. The lights dimmed slightly, and a spotlight illuminated a small stage where a woman in a glittering blue dress stood at a microphone. Alex recognized her as a local news anchor. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "it's time for our annual auction. Remember, every dollar goes directly to putting musical instruments in the hands of children who otherwise would never have the chance to play." Alex settled back in his chair, preparing for the usual parade of vacation packages and celebrity meet and greets. He had attended enough of these events to know the drill. He would bid on something modest, win it, and then donate it back to be re-auctioned. Good publicity, tax write-off, minimal effort. The first few items went quickly. A weekend in Napa Valley, dinner with a famous chef, box seats at the symphony. Alex kept his paddle down, waiting for something that wouldn't require his actual participation. "And now," the announcer said, her voice rising with excitement, "something truly special. Our next item is a private piano recital by Elena Vasquez." A polite applause rippled through the crowd. Alex glanced at Thomas, who shrugged, clearly not recognizing the name either. Elena is a former Juilliard student who has graciously offered to perform a full 90-minute recital in the home of our winning bidder. Perfect for your next dinner party or special celebration. A picture appeared on the large screen behind the stage. A young woman with dark hair sitting at a grand piano, her face serious in concentration. She wasn't smiling for the camera. She seemed lost in her music. "Who is she?" Alex whispered to Carolyn Wu, the tech journalist seated on his other side. "No idea," Carolyn whispered back. "Must be one of those almost famous people." "Starting bid is $5,000, the announcer called out. A paddle went up across the room. Then another. Alex felt a nudge at his elbow and turned to find Patricia standing beside him again. "This would be perfect for your birthday party next month," she said. "I heard you're having 50 people at your house." "I already booked a jazz quartet," he replied. "Yes, but this would be so much more memorable." Her eyes twinkled with mischief. "Unless you're worried your guests might get bored." Alex recognized the challenge in her voice. Patricia knew exactly how to push his buttons. Suggesting he might host a boring party was a direct hit to his pride. 10,000. Someone called from the back of the room. 11, countered another voice. Patricia leaned down. "She's actually quite talented. Her mother was a concert pianist in Mexico City before they moved. Here. 15,000, called a woman in a red dress whom Alex recognized as the wife of a hedge fund manager. Something about the whole situation suddenly struck Alex as amusing. Here they were, a room full of people who probably couldn't tell Chopin from Beethoven, bidding on a performance by someone none of them had ever heard of. And Patricia, clever Patricia, trying to manipulate him into bidding by appealing to his competitive nature. Well, two could play at that game. $50,000, he said loudly, raising his paddle. A hush fell over the room. The announcer's eyes widened. 50,000 from Mr. Alexander Reed, she announced, her voice pitched higher with excitement. Do I hear 55? The room remained silent. The woman in the red dress shook her head slightly. Going once, going twice. The announcer paused dramatically. Sold to Mr. Alexander Reed for $50,000. Applause broke out around him. Thomas looked at him like he'd lost his mind. $50,000 for an unknown pianist? He muttered. Alex shrugged, a smirk playing at his lips. It's for charity. Besides, he added, lowering his voice, think of the entertainment value. My birthday party just got a lot more interesting. What do you mean? Thomas asked. I mean, Alex said, taking another sip of his champagne, that we're going to have a real-life version of those talent show auditions where someone thinks they're amazing, but they're actually terrible. Thomas chuckled. You think she's bad? I think if she were any good, we'd have heard of her. Juilliard has thousands of students. Most of them end up teaching piano to bored kids in the suburbs. Alex set down his glass. I'll put her between the cocktail hour and dinner. Everyone will be just drunk enough to enjoy the show no matter how it goes. Patricia returned, beaming with satisfaction. Alex, you're wonderful. That puts us over our goal for the night. Happy to help, he replied smoothly. When can my assistant contact Ms. Vasquez to arrange the details? I'll send you her information tomorrow. Patricia squeezed his arm. She'll be thrilled. This means so much to her. I'm sure it does, Alex said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. After Patricia left, Carolyn leaned toward him. You're terrible, she said, though her tone was more amused than disapproving. You're going to humiliate that poor woman, aren't you? I'm going to give her exactly what she signed up for, a chance to perform for a group of wealthy potential patrons. Alex straightened his tie. If she's as good as Patricia implies, it could be the opportunity of a lifetime. If not, he shrugged, then my guests get an amusing story to tell. Later that night, as his driver navigated the city streets toward his penthouse apartment, Alex found himself scrolling through his phone, searching for information on Elena Vasquez. There wasn't much, a few mentions in local arts publications, a brief profile on a community music school website where she apparently taught, and a grainy video from 6 years ago of a young woman playing at what looked like a student recital. He pressed play, but the audio quality was poor, the piano sounding tinny and distant. After 30 seconds, he closed the video unimpressed. $50,000 for a piano teacher, he murmured to himself, shaking his head, but a smile played at his lips as he imagined the scene at his birthday party next month. His friends and business associates expecting entertainment of the highest caliber, and instead getting, well, whatever level Ms. Vasquez turned out to be. It would make for an excellent story at the very least. And if there was one thing Alexander Reed appreciated more than money well spent, it was a good story at someone else's expense. As the car pulled up to his building, he made a mental note to have his assistant call the jazz quartet and cancel their booking. They had just been upgraded to backup entertainment, in case Ms. Vasquez's performance turned out to be as amateur as he suspected it would be. Should be a birthday to remember, he said to himself as he stepped out of the car. The doorman greeted him with a respectful nod. Unaware that his employer had just spent $50,000 on what would likely be the most expensive joke he'd ever orchestrated. Elena Vasquez's fingers moved across the keys of the upright piano, playing the final measures of Rachmaninoff's Prelude in G minor. The notes filled the small living room of her apartment, bouncing off the walls that were too close together for the sound to fully bloom. Still, she played with intensity, her eyes closed, feeling the music more than hearing it. When she finished, the last chord hanging in the air, a timer on her phone buzzed. 6:30, time to get ready for her evening job. That was beautiful, said her roommate Lily, who stood in the doorway holding a mug of tea. I never get tired of hearing you play. Elena smiled, closing the piano lid gently. Thanks, just trying to stay in practice. For the big performance? Patricia texted me that someone bid $50,000 for your recital. That's wild. Elena's eyes widened. 50,000? She told me they were hoping for maybe 10 or 15,000. She shook her head in disbelief. Who would pay that much to hear me play? Someone with excellent taste, Lily said with a grin. Or someone with more money than sense. Either way, it's great for the foundation. Did she say who won the auction? Elena asked, gathering her sheet music. Some tech billionaire. I can't remember his name. Lily took a sip of her tea. Are you nervous? Elena considered the question as she slipped the music into her bag. Not about playing. I'm nervous about the whole situation. Playing at some rich person's house for their fancy friends, she sighed. Not exactly the concert hall I dreamed of when I was at Juilliard. Hey, Lily said softly. This could be a big opportunity. These people know people who know people. One good connection and you could be playing real venues again. Elena nodded, but her expression remained doubtful. I have to get ready for work. Drinks don't serve themselves. 30 minutes later, Elena walked into the Copper Kettle, a popular bar in the Arts District where she had worked for the past 2 years. The evening crowd was just beginning to trickle in, mostly office workers stopping for a drink before heading home. There she is, our resident piano prodigy, called Dave, the bar manager, as she tied on her apron. Heard you're going to be playing for some big shot. Should I start telling customers they're being served by a celebrity? Elena rolled her eyes good-naturedly. Hardly. It's just a charity thing. Well, I'm telling everyone anyway, Dave said. Might help with tips. The evening passed in a blur of drink orders, small talk, and the occasional spilled beer. Elena moved efficiently behind the bar, her mind often drifting to what pieces she would play at the recital. She had less than a month to prepare a 90-minute program that would impress people who could probably afford to see the world's top pianists in concert whenever they wanted. Around 9, her phone buzzed in her pocket. A text from Patricia. Call me when you get a chance. Great news about your recital. Elena waited until her break at 10 to step outside and make the call. Elena, Patricia's voice was bubbling with excitement. I can't believe our luck. Do you know who won your recital? Lily mentioned something about a tech billionaire. Not just any tech billionaire. Alexander Reed. Elena's stomach dropped. Even she knew that name. Alexander Reed, founder of Horizon Technologies. Worth something like $11 billion according to the magazines at the grocery checkout. Also known for his cutting wit and low tolerance for anything less than excellence. Oh, was all she managed to say. This is huge, Elena, Patricia continued, not noticing her hesitation. He's having a birthday party at his home next month. 50 guests, all extremely wealthy and connected. If you impress them, doors will open. And if I don't? Elena asked quietly. There was a brief pause. You will, Patricia said firmly. You're brilliant, and they'll see that. His assistant will contact you tomorrow about the details. I've already told them you're available on the 15th. After they hung up, Elena leaned against the brick wall of the bar, taking deep breaths of the cool night air. Alexander Reed, the man who had famously told a struggling entrepreneur on a reality TV show that mediocrity deserves nothing but failure. The man whose cutting reviews of restaurants and hotels sometimes went viral for their creative cruelty. And he had paid $50,000 to hear her play. When her shift ended at midnight, Elena took the bus home, too tired to walk the 15 blocks to her apartment. The bus was nearly empty this late, just her and a few other night shift workers heading home. She rested her head against the window, watching the city lights blur past. 5 years ago, she had been on track for a very different life. A full scholarship to Juilliard. Professors who spoke of future concert tours, even a few small but prestigious competitions won. Then came her mother's diagnosis. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Elena had withdrawn from school mid-semester to return home, to care for her mother during her final months. By the time she was ready to return, her scholarship had been given to someone else. Her savings and what little her mother had left went to medical bills. Now at 28, she taught piano to children 3 days a week at a community music school, worked evenings at the bar, and played at charity events whenever Patricia could arrange it. She still practiced daily, still kept her technique sharp, still believed somewhere deep down that her chance would come again. Maybe this was it. Or maybe it was just another wealthy person treating art like a commodity, something to be consumed and forgotten. The next morning, Elena woke to an email from someone named Vanessa Wright, executive assistant to Alexander Reed. The message was brief and professional, confirming the date and time of the recital, and requesting a phone call to discuss logistics and expectations. Elena called the number provided and was surprised when it was answered on the first ring. Vanessa Wright speaking. Hi, this is Elena Vasquez. About the piano recital? Yes, Ms. Vasquez, thank you for calling promptly. The woman's voice was efficient, almost mechanical. Mr. Reed would like the recital to take place between cocktails and dinner, from approximately 7:15 to 7:45 p.m. Elena frowned. I'm sorry, but the auction was for a 90-minute recital. That's only 30 minutes. Mr. Reed feels that 30 minutes would be more appropriate for the flow of the evening, Vanessa replied smoothly. The guests will be standing during cocktails, then moving to dinner. I understand, but that's not what was agreed upon, Elena said, trying to keep her voice steady. A full recital requires at least 90 minutes to properly develop a program. There was a pause, then, I'll speak with Mr. Reed about the timing. In the meantime, could you provide a list of pieces you intend to play? He likes to be informed about these things. Elena had been thinking about this since the auction. If she only had one shot to impress people of this caliber, she would need to showcase both technical skill and emotional depth. I'm planning to perform Rachmaninoff's Prelude in G minor, Liszt's Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2, Debussy's Clair de Lune, Chopin's Revolutionary Etude, and Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, she said. But that's for a full recital. If it's only 30 minutes, I'll need to adjust the program. I see, Vanessa said, making no comment on her selections. Mr. Reed has a Steinway Model D in his home. Will that be suitable? Elena almost laughed. The Steinway Model D was the pinnacle of concert grand pianos, worth at least $150,000. Yes, that will be suitable, she said, managing to keep her voice neutral. Excellent. Regarding attire, Mr. Reed requests formal evening wear. Black tie. I'll make sure I'm appropriately dressed, Elena assured her. After a few more details about the address and arrival time, the call ended. Elena sat at her small kitchen table staring at her notes. 30 minutes instead of 90, standing during cocktails. The words painted a clear picture. Background music, not a performance. They didn't want a recital. They wanted musical wallpaper. Her phone buzzed with a text from Lily. How did the call go? Elena typed back, they want to cut it to 30 mins during cocktails. Basically want background music. Lily's response came quickly. That sucks. What are you going to do? Good question. Elena looked across the room at her piano, the one possession she had refused to sell even during the hardest financial times. It had been her mother's, and before that her grandmother's. 3 generations of Vasquez women had played on those keys. She walked over and opened the lid, playing a few notes of the Rachmaninoff piece she had been practicing earlier. The sound centered her as it always did. She knew what her mother would say if she were here. Never compromise your art. Play every note as if it's the most important one you'll ever play, whether it's for one person or 1,000. Elena picked up her phone and texted Lily back. I'm going to remind them what they paid for. 3 weeks before the performance, Alexander stood in his spacious living room, watching as workers carefully positioned his grand piano. The Steinway Model D gleamed under the recessed lighting, its polished black surface reflecting the chandelier above. A little to the left, he directed. I want it visible from both the main floor and the mezzanine. Thomas, who had stopped by to go over some business matters, observed from the sidelines. You're really going all out for this piano recital, aren't you? He remarked, amusement in his voice. Presentation matters, Alexander replied. If we're going to have a show, we might as well set the proper stage. A show, Thomas repeated. That's what you're calling it now? Alexander smiled slightly. Entertainment, then. My guests expect the best. After the workers left, Alexander walked Thomas through the rest of his plans for the birthday celebration. The cocktail hour would take place in the main living area, with servers circulating among the guests. Then Elena Vasquez would perform her recital, though Alexander had instructed Vanessa to keep it to 30 minutes, just long enough to be amusing without becoming tedious. Afterward, everyone would move to the dining room for a meal prepared by a chef he'd flown in from Paris. What if she's actually good? Thomas asked suddenly. Alexander paused. What do you mean? This pianist. What if she turns out to be talented? According to Vanessa, she's teaching children at some community center and bartending at night, Alexander said dismissively. If she were truly gifted, she'd be doing something more with her life than playing at charity auctions. Thomas shrugged. I'm just saying you might be surprised. I doubt it, Alexander replied. But either way, it will be memorable. Meanwhile, across town, Elena's life had transformed into a grueling routine of practice, work, and more practice. She had successfully pushed back against the 30-minute limit, with Vanessa reluctantly agreeing to a full hour for her performance. It wasn't the 90 minutes originally promised, but it was enough for Elena to showcase what she could do. She had also negotiated to have proper seating arranged instead of having people stand during cocktails. If they were going to listen, they should at least be comfortable. Every morning, Elena woke at 5 to practice for 3 hours before teaching her first piano student of the day. During lunch breaks, she reviewed sheet music, making notes about tempo and emphasis. After teaching, she headed to the bar for her evening shift. And when she returned home close to midnight, she often practiced again, playing softly with the piano's damper engaged to avoid disturbing the neighbors. "You're going to work yourself to exhaustion," Lily warned one evening, finding Elena at the piano at nearly 1 in the morning. "You've been at this for 2 weeks straight." Elena rolled her shoulders, trying to release the tension that had built there. "I have to be perfect," she said simply. "This is the biggest opportunity I've had in years." "I get that, but you need rest too," Lily insisted. "You look like you're about to collapse." Reluctantly, Elena closed the piano lid. "You're right. I'll go to bed." But as she lay in her small bedroom staring at the ceiling, rest wouldn't come. Every time she closed her eyes, she imagined Alexander Reed and his wealthy friends, watching her with critical expressions, whispering to each other about her performance. What if her fingers slipped? What if she lost her place in the music? What if, after all this preparation, she simply wasn't good enough? The next day, Elena asked for time off from the bar, something she had never done before. 2 weeks? Dave looked at her in surprise. "That's a lot of shifts to cover, Elena." "I know, and I'm sorry," she said. "But this performance could change everything for me. I need to focus completely." Dave studied her face, noting the dark circles under her eyes and the tension in her expression. "All right," he said finally. "But I expect you back right after. And if you end up playing Carnegie Hall because of this, I want front row tickets." Elena smiled, relieved. "Deal." With her evenings now free, Elena intensified her practice schedule. She worked through each piece methodically, breaking down difficult passages and repeating them until her fingers moved automatically. She recorded herself playing and listened critically, noting every missed nuance, every rushed tempo, every imperfect phrasing. 1 week before the performance, Patricia arranged for Elena to practice on a proper concert grand at a local music school after hours. "It's not a Steinway Model D," Patricia apologized, "but it's closer than your upright at home." The moment Elena's fingers touched the keys of the grand piano, she felt the difference. The action was smoother, the sound richer and more resonant. She began to play Rachmaninoff's Prelude in G minor, and the music filled the empty auditorium, powerful and commanding. Patricia sat in the front row, her eyes closed, listening. When Elena finished, she opened them again. "That was extraordinary," she said softly. "You've been holding back all this time." Elena shook her head. "Not holding back, just waiting for the right piano." "Well, Alexander Reed has the right piano," Patricia said, "and when you play like that on his Steinway, those people won't know what hit them." As the day of the performance approached, Alexander found himself oddly curious about Elena Vasquez. He had looked her up online again, but found little beyond what he'd seen before. A few mentions in local arts publications. That same grainy recital video from years ago. "Have you confirmed all the details with Ms. Vasquez?" he asked Vanessa 3 days before the event. "Yes. Mr. Reed. She'll arrive at 6:30 to familiarize herself with the piano before guests arrive at 7:00. She's requested a quiet space to prepare, so I've arranged for her to use the library and her program. She's provided a list of pieces," Vanessa said, handing him a printed sheet. "She's still insisting on a full hour, as we discussed." Alexander scanned the list. Rachmaninoff, Liszt, Debussy, Chopin, Beethoven. Ambitious choices for someone of her presumed caliber. He handed the paper back to Vanessa. "Make sure the piano is tuned again the morning of the party," he said, "and have the sound system ready as a backup." "Sound system, sir?" "In case we need to switch to recorded music," he explained. "I want options if things don't go as planned." The night before the performance, Elena couldn't sleep at all. She sat at her piano in the darkness, her fingers moving silently over the keys, playing the pieces in her mind. Tomorrow would determine whether the past 5 years had been merely a detour in her career or the end of her dreams altogether. She thought about her mother, who had sacrificed so much for her music education, who had worked extra shifts to pay for lessons when Elena was young, who had beamed with pride at every recital, who had cried when Elena was accepted to Juilliard. "I'll make you proud tomorrow." "Mama," she whispered into the quiet apartment. On the morning of the performance, Alexander woke early. He had dreamed of music, not the polished, perfect recordings he usually listened to, but something raw and emotional that lingered in his mind as he showered and dressed. He walked through his home, checking that everything was in order. The caterers would arrive at 4:00, the servers at 5:30. The florist had delivered arrangements the previous evening, filling the space with elegant blooms. The Steinway had been tuned, its lid propped fully open to maximize its sound. Alexander stood beside it, running his hand lightly across its surface. He had purchased the piano 3 years ago but rarely played it. He could read music and play simple pieces, lessons forced upon him by his mother in childhood, but he had never felt the passion for it that true musicians described. He checked his watch. Guests would begin arriving in 10 hours. Elena Vasquez would be here even sooner. By this time tomorrow, the whole event would be over. Another birthday celebrated, another year begun. For a moment, he tried to imagine the evening from her perspective. Walking into a stranger's home, sitting at an unfamiliar piano, playing for people who might not even be listening. It was an unusual feeling for him, this attempt to see things through someone else's eyes. Then he shook his head slightly, dismissing the thought. Tonight was about entertaining his guests and celebrating his birthday. Elena Vasquez was simply part of that entertainment, nothing more. Still, as he left the room, he found himself wondering what she might be doing at this moment. Was she nervous? Confident? Did she know who he was, what he expected? Little did he know that across town, Elena was standing in front of her closet trying to decide which of her 2 formal dresses would be more appropriate for the evening. The black one was more traditional for a classical performance, but the deep blue matched the description of the dress she had worn in the photograph shown at the auction. "The blue one," Lily said, leaning against the doorframe. "It brings out your eyes and you look more confident in it." "You think so?" Elena held it up, studying it critically. "Definitely. And confidence is what you need tonight." Lily smiled encouragingly. "You're going to be amazing, you know." "I hope so," Elena replied quietly. "I really hope so." The sun was setting as Elena's taxi pulled up to the address she'd been given. She had expected something impressive, but the reality of Alexander Reed's home still took her breath away. The modern mansion stretched across what must have been at least an acre of prime real estate, all glass and stone and dramatic angles, lit from below by carefully placed landscape lighting. "You sure this is the right place?" the taxi driver asked, sounding doubtful. Elena checked the address on her phone again. "Yes, this is it." She paid the fare and stepped out, clutching her small bag of personal items. She had worn her blue dress as Lily suggested, with her mother's pearl earrings, the only valuable thing she had left from her, and her hair swept up in a simple but elegant style. A security guard checked her name against a list, then directed her to a side entrance where a woman in a sleek black pantsuit waited. "Ms. Vasquez," the woman said, extending her hand. "I'm Vanessa Wright. We spoke on the phone." "Yes, hello," Elena replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "Please follow me. Mr. Reed has arranged for you to use the library to prepare. The guests will begin arriving in about 30 minutes, and you'll begin your performance at 7:30. Elena followed Vanessa through the house, trying not to gawk at the artwork on the walls. Original pieces, she was certain, by artists whose work she had only seen in museums. They passed through a large open living area where staff were arranging flowers and placing trays of glasses on tables. And there, positioned perfectly to command attention from every angle, was the Steinway. Even from across the room, Elena could see its magnificence. Her fingers itched to touch it, to feel its response, to draw music from those perfect keys. "You'll have time to acquaint yourself with the piano before your performance," Vanessa said, noting her gaze. "But first, let me show you where you can leave your things and prepare." The library was a surprisingly cozy room, given the modern austerity of the rest of the house. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with volumes that looked read rather than just displayed. A small fireplace with 2 leather chairs created a comfortable nook. "I'll come for you when it's time," Vanessa said. "Would you like anything while you wait?" "Water, tea?" "Water would be wonderful, thank you," Elena replied. After Vanessa left, Elena set down her bag and took a deep breath. The nerves she had been suppressing all day threatened to overwhelm her now. She closed her eyes and practiced the breathing exercises her first piano teacher had taught her long ago. Slow inhale through the nose, hold. Slow exhale through the mouth, again and again until her heart stopped racing. When she felt calmer, she opened her eyes and moved to the window. From here she could see guests beginning to arrive, stepping from luxury cars as valets took the keys. Women in designer dresses, men in tuxedos, all exuding an air of casual wealth that Elena had only observed from a distance. These are the people who will decide my future, she thought. Then she shook her head. No, I decide my future. They just get to witness it. Meanwhile, Alexander was greeting his guests in the main foyer, accepting birthday wishes and compliments on the spectacular setting. He was in his element, charming and witty, moving easily from one conversation to another. Alex, this place is incredible, said Robert Lee, a venture capitalist who had backed Alexander's first company. You've outdone yourself. Wait until you hear the entertainment, Alexander replied with a smile. I've arranged something special. Oh? Another famous band this year? Robert asked. Not exactly. Something more interesting. As more guests arrived, servers circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres. The buzz of conversation grew louder, punctuated by laughter and the clink of glasses. Alexander kept glancing at his watch, calculating the timing. In 30 minutes, Elena Vasquez would begin her performance and his guest would have a story to tell for years to come. At 7:15, Vanessa appeared at his elbow. Ms. Vasquez would like a few minutes to familiarize herself with the piano before the performance, she murmured. Alexander nodded. Of course. Make sure the guests have full glasses for the show. He watched as Vanessa crossed the room to a door he knew led to the library. A moment later, she returned with a young woman in a deep blue dress. From this distance, Alexander could only see that she moved with a certain grace, her posture perfect, her expression composed. As Elena approached the piano, the buzz of conversation continued around her. Few people noticed her, too engaged in their own discussions to pay attention to a woman they didn't recognize. She ran her hand lightly over the glossy surface of the Steinway, then carefully adjusted the bench to her height. Elena sat down, positioned her hands over the keys and played a few soft chords, testing the action and the sound. The piano responded beautifully, each note clear and resonant. She played a brief scale, then a more complex run of notes, feeling how the instrument responded to her touch. Someone nearby finally noticed her. Is that the pianist? A woman asked her companion loudly enough for Elena to hear. Must be, the man replied. Alex mentioned something about a recital. Elena continued her warm-up, blocking out the voices around her. This was between her and the piano now. Nothing else mattered. At precisely 7:30, Vanessa approached Alexander. Shall I ask for everyone's attention? Alexander nodded, suddenly curious to see how this would unfold. Vanessa moved to the center of the room and gently tapped a spoon against a crystal glass. The ringing sound cut through the conversation and gradually the room quieted. Ladies and gentlemen, Vanessa announced, Mr. Reed is pleased to present a special performance this evening by pianist Elena Vasquez. There was polite applause as guests turned toward the piano. Some found seats on the couches and chairs that had been arranged for this purpose. Others remained standing, drinks in hand, expectant expressions on their faces. Alexander positioned himself where he could see both Elena and his guests. He wanted to catch their reactions when she began to play. The raised eyebrows, the hidden smiles, the uncomfortable glances. Elena sat motionless for a moment, gathering herself. Then she placed her hands on the keys and began to play. The opening chords of Rachmaninoff's Prelude in G minor filled the room, powerful and commanding. Elena's fingers moved with precision and confidence, drawing from the piano a sound that was at once technically perfect and deeply emotional. Alexander's smirk froze on his face. This was not what he had expected, not at all. He had anticipated something competent but uninspired, or perhaps technically sound but lacking in passion. What he was hearing instead was the work of a true artist, someone who understood not just the notes but the heart of the music. Around the room, conversations that had continued in whispers during the first few bars now died away completely. Guests who had been half listening, their attention divided between the music and their drinks, now turned fully toward the piano. A woman near Alexander set down her glass, her eyes widening in surprise. Elena, for her part, was lost in the music. The world had narrowed to just her, the piano and the composition she was bringing to life. Her fingers flew across the keys during the rapid passages, then slowed for the contemplative moments, each note given exactly the weight and emotion it required. As she moved from Rachmaninoff to Liszt's Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2, the atmosphere in the room changed. What had begun as a polite obligation, listening to their host's hired entertainment, had become something else entirely. They were witnessing something exceptional, and they knew it. Alexander couldn't take his eyes off her. The concentration on her face, the way her body swayed slightly with the music, the absolute assurance with which she tackled even the most challenging passages, it was mesmerizing and humbling. He had assumed, based on nothing but his own prejudices, that she would be mediocre at best. He had planned to find amusement in her shortcomings. Instead, he was being taught a lesson in making assumptions. The piece ended, and there was a moment of complete silence before the applause began. Hesitant at first, then building to enthusiastic appreciation. Elena acknowledged it with a slight nod, then moved directly into Debussy's Clair de Lune, the gentle, dreamy opening creating an immediate contrast to the passionate intensity of the Liszt. Thomas appeared at Alexander's side. "Still think this is just entertainment?" he asked quietly. Alexander shook his head slightly, unable to find words. He had been wrong, so completely wrong that he felt almost dizzy with the realization. As Elena continued her program, moving from Debussy to Chopin and finally to Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, the audience remained captivated. People who had planned to circulate, to network, to discuss business opportunities, instead stayed rooted in place, unwilling to miss a single note. When the final chords of the Moonlight Sonata faded away, there was another moment of silence, longer this time, as if no one wanted to break the spell that had been cast over the room. Then came applause, not the polite acknowledgement of a hired performer, but the genuine appreciation of an audience moved by what they had heard. Elena rose from the bench and turned to face the room, offering a small, graceful bow. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes bright with emotion, and the exhilaration of having performed at her absolute best. Alexander found himself moving toward her, drawn by something he couldn't quite name. As he approached, their eyes met, and he saw in hers a quiet pride, a knowledge of her own worth that had nothing to do with his approval or anyone else's. "Ms. Vasquez," he said, his voice not quite steady. "That was extraordinary." "Thank you, Mr. Reed," she replied simply. Around them, guests were still applauding, some calling out praise, others simply shaking their heads in amazement. Vanessa appeared at Alexander's side, a question in her eyes. Should she direct people to dinner now, as planned? Alexander shook his head slightly. This moment deserved more than a quick transition to the next item on the evening's agenda. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, raising his voice to be heard over the applause, "I believe we have just witnessed something truly special. Please join me in showing your appreciation for Elena Vasquez." The applause grew louder. Someone called for an encore, and the request was quickly taken up by others. Elena looked to Alexander, a question in her eyes. "Please," he said, gesturing to the piano, "if you wouldn't mind." She nodded and returned to the bench. As she began to play again, a piece Alexander didn't recognize but found instantly captivating, he realized that his birthday party had become something entirely different from what he had planned. It had become her concert, and somehow he didn't mind at all. The dinner that followed Elena's performance was unlike any event Alexander had ever hosted. Instead of the usual discussions of investments and market trends, his guests could talk of nothing but the music they had just heard. Elena, seated at Alexander's right as an honored guest rather than hired entertainment, found herself answering questions about her training, her influences, and her future plans. "You studied at Juilliard?" asked Victoria Chen, a well-known patron of the arts. "Why aren't you performing professionally?" Elena hesitated, unsure how much of her personal story to share in this setting. "Life took an unexpected turn," she said simply. "Family obligations required me to leave school." "What a loss for the music world," Victoria commented. "You have a rare gift." Across the table, Robert Lee leaned forward. "Have you considered returning to your studies?" "There are fellowships for exceptional talents. I've looked into it," Elena admitted. But at my age, most of those opportunities are focused on much younger students. Nonsense, Robert said dismissively. Age is irrelevant when talent is this exceptional. I serve on the board of the Westwood Conservatory. We should talk. Alexander observed these exchanges with growing interest. The woman who had arrived at his home as a hired performer was now the center of attention among some of the most influential people in the city. And she was handling it with a quiet dignity that impressed him almost as much as her playing had. Later, as guests began to depart, many made a point of stopping to speak with Elena, pressing business cards into her hand, making promises of introductions and opportunities. Alexander stood nearby, watching as his birthday party transformed into what felt like the beginning of something important. When the last guest had gone, Elena found herself alone with Alexander in the vast living room, the Steinway still open, waiting for the next touch of fingers on its keys. "Thank you for including me in the dinner," she said. "It wasn't part of our arrangement." Alexander shook his head slightly. "Nothing about this evening went according to arrangement, Ms. Vasquez. Please call me Elena." Elena. He gestured toward 2 chairs near the fireplace. "Would you join me for a moment before you leave?" They sat, an awkward silence falling between them. Alexander was not accustomed to feeling uncomfortable in his own home, but he found himself struggling for words. "I owe you an apology," he said finally. Elena looked at him questioningly. "When I bid on your performance at the auction, I did it as a joke." The word felt bitter in his mouth. "I expected something entertaining, but not in the way it turned out to be." "I know," Elena said quietly. Alexander's eyebrows rose in surprise. "You knew?" "Patricia warned me about your reputation," she explained. "And when your assistant tried to reduce my performance time and position me as background music during cocktails, it was fairly obvious what you were expecting." Alexander winced. "Yet you still came and played your heart out." "Why?" Elena considered the question. "Because the music deserves it," she said finally. "Rachmaninoff and Chopin and Beethoven, they didn't write background music. They wrote pieces meant to be performed with everything you have. I couldn't dishonor that, no matter the circumstances." Alexander nodded slowly, a new respect forming. "Your integrity is as impressive as your talent." "Thank you." Elena glanced at her watch. "I should call a taxi. It's getting late." "Of course," Alexander stood. "But before you go, I have a proposition for you." Elena looked up at him warily. "Not that kind of proposition," he said quickly, reading her expression. "A business one. Or perhaps a philanthropic one. I'm listening." "I'd like to establish a foundation," Alexander said, "to support musicians like yourself, artists with extraordinary talent who face barriers to pursuing their careers." "I want you to be its first beneficiary." Elena stared at him, speechless. "The foundation would cover the costs for you to complete your education, or to pursue whatever path would best develop your talent," he continued. "Concert tours, master classes with renowned pianists, whatever you need. Why would you do that?" Elena asked, finding her voice at last. "Because what I heard tonight shouldn't be confined to my living room," Alexander replied. "And because I've spent too much of my wealth on things that don't matter. This would matter. I don't know what to say. Say you'll think about it." Alexander reached for a business card and handed it to her. "Call me when you've decided." The taxi ride home felt surreal to Elena. She sat quietly in the back seat, her mind racing with everything that had happened. The performance, the connections made at dinner, and now Alexander's offer. It was overwhelming. When she unlocked the door to her apartment, she found Lily still awake, waiting for her. "Well?" Lily demanded the moment Elena stepped inside. "How did it go?" Elena set down her bag and kicked off her shoes. "It was..." She paused, searching for words. "It was life-changing." "That good?" Lily's eyes widened. "Better." Elena collapsed onto the couch and told Lily everything, how the audience had responded to her playing, the conversations at dinner, and finally, Alexander's surprising offer. "He wants to establish a foundation?" Lily repeated in disbelief. "With you as the first beneficiary?" "That's huge, Elena!" "I know." Elena stared at the business card in her hand. "But I'm not sure if I should accept." "What?" "Why not?" "Because I don't want to be anyone's charity case," Elena said slowly. "Even a billionaire's?" Lily shook her head firmly. This isn't charity. It's investment. He heard your talent and recognized its value. That's different. 1 week later, Elena sat across from Alexander in his office, a sleek space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Between them on the glass desk lay a document outlining the structure of the Reed Foundation for Musical Excellence. The terms are exactly as we discussed, Alexander said. The foundation will provide funding for you to complete your degree, cover living expenses while you study, and arrange for performance opportunities. In return, you'll serve as the foundation's artistic advisor once your career is established, helping to identify other musicians who deserve support. Elena had spent days considering the offer, consulting with Patricia, with her former teachers, even with Dave from the bar, who had told her bluntly, "If you don't take this opportunity, I'll never serve you another drink as long as I live." In the end, what had convinced her was Alexander's approach. He had structured the foundation as a professional arrangement, not a personal gift. "It respected her dignity and her talent, I accept," she said, picking up the pen. "And I thank you." Alexander nodded, something like satisfaction in his eyes. "The first performance under the foundation's sponsorship will be in 3 months. A proper recital at the Westwood Concert Hall. Robert Lee has already arranged it." 6 months later, Alexander sat in the front row of Carnegie Hall, watching as Elena walked onto the stage to thunderous applause. Her blue dress, a new one but similar to the one she had worn at his home, caught the lights as she bowed to the audience, then took her place at the piano. The journey from his living room to this iconic stage had been swift but not easy. Elena had worked tirelessly, balancing intensive studies with performance preparations. Alexander had watched from a careful distance, providing support through the foundation but never interfering with her artistic choices. As Elena began to play Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, accompanied by a full orchestra, Alexander felt a strange mixture of pride and humility. Pride in having recognized her talent eventually, and humility in remembering how close he had come to dismissing it. After the performance backstage, Elena greeted him with a warm smile. "What did you think?" she asked. "I think," Alexander replied, "that $50,000 was the best investment I ever made." Elena laughed. "You've certainly gotten a good return. The foundation has supported 12 musicians now, hasn't it? 15, actually," he corrected. "The newest 3 were approved yesterday. A cellist from Detroit, a violinist from rural Georgia, and a pianist from Ecuador. All extraordinary talents facing extraordinary obstacles. I look forward to meeting them," Elena said. "After the tour, of course." "Of course." Alexander hesitated, then added, "Your mother would have been proud." Elena's eyes softened. "Yes, she would." She glanced at her watch. "I should go. There's a reception, and you're the guest of honor." Alexander finished for her. "Go, enjoy it. You've earned it." As he watched her walk away, surrounded by admirers and well-wishers, Alexander reflected on how one evening had changed the direction of his life as much as hers. The Reed Foundation had become his passion, more fulfilling than any business venture. He had discovered a purpose beyond accumulating wealth, helping to bring beauty into the world through supporting artists like Elena. The following spring, Elena returned to New York after her European tour to perform at a benefit for the foundation. The event was held at Alexander's home, the same space where she had first played for him and his guests. As she took her place at the now familiar Steinway, she smiled at the audience gathered before her. "Tonight's encore piece is one I've composed myself," she announced. "It's called The Skeptic's Conversion, and it's dedicated to the man who taught me that sometimes being underestimated is the greatest opportunity of all." She glanced at Alexander, who sat in the front row, and their eyes met in a moment of shared understanding. Then she began to play, her fingers dancing across the keys, creating music that spoke of doubt transformed into belief, of mockery turned to respect, of 2 lives changed forever by the power of genuine talent finally recognized. And Alexander, listening with closed eyes, knew that this, not his companies, not his wealth, not his influence, would be his true legacy. The music that might never have been heard if not for one pivotal evening, when a billionaire's joke became something serious indeed.